Good morning, everyone who has joined this session. My name is Alicia DiCasola. I'm the Development Director for the Carolina Thread Trail and Catawba Lands Conservancy. I'm going to serve as your moderator for this session. So just to make sure you're in the right session you intended to be in, this is Funding Opportunities through the North Carolina Land and Water Fund. We have three presenters today. We're going to hear from Marissa Hartzler, who is the Stewardship Program Manager for the North Carolina Land and Water Fund. We're going to hear from Damon Hearn, who's the Western Field Representative for the North Carolina Land and Water Fund. And then we're going to hear from Amanda Byram, who is the Land Conservation Director for Catawba Lands Conservancy. So I want to go over just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started on our session. Our session will last 1 hour. There'll be about 45 minutes of presentation. And then in the last 15 minutes, I'll give our presenters just a little bit of a warning to wrap up. And that's when we'll allow time for your questions. On your session screen, on the right sidebar, there should be a portal that says Q&A, polls, chat, and community. Please use that Q&A section to post your questions, type them out. You can type them at any time during the presentation, but I'm going to hold them until the end and then share them with our presenters. There's also a chat function you're welcome to use. The chat function is a great place if you just want to share a thought, a resource, a link, or if you're having some sort of technical issue to let us know, or you have some feedback. Q&A for questions, chat for other needs. So please feel free, and we encourage you to utilize those functions. I also want to let folks know that while you're in this session, if you toggle over to some of the other navigation options on the side, like attendees, communities, and sponsors, it does take you out of the session, and we have to readmit you, which is totally fine. We will do it. It just sometimes has a little bit of a minute, or maybe not a minute, but has a little bit of a delay. So just want to remind you, if you are using some of those other features, it will sometimes take you out of the session, and then we have to re-enter or re-allow you back in. I think that covers all the housekeeping items I have. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to our three presenters to start their presentation, and then in about 45 minutes, I'll be back for Q&A. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, everybody. Good to virtually see your names out there, and thanks for joining us. Marissa and I and Amanda are going to talk about funding opportunities with NC Land and Water Fund and experiences with those funds as related to the Thread Trail, and give you some background in general. I'm going to start out with kind of an overview, and Marissa will show them the navigation screen on our agenda on the next screen. I'm going to give you an overview of our work, talk about the land acquisition program and some of the features and pieces of that, and how you can think about applying and what kind of projects we are looking for and how our scoring system works. I'll tell you about our grant cycle in 2021, give you a little bit of a preview of that. And then Marissa is going to actually take you into some of the real stuff with what happens after you get a grant from NC Land and Water Fund, what happens after you've closed on the property, where do you go from there, and then the long-term management with conservation agreements in partnership with NC Land and Water Fund. And we'll hopefully leave some time for discussion, and then Amanda will talk about her work. So first off, you'll see that we have a new name and a new logo. Up until the fall, we were known as the Clean Water Management Trust Fund, and that's what we've been known for a very long time. We changed our name to the NC Land and Water Fund, got a swanky new logo, but nothing's changed about our mission. Nothing's changed about who we are, what we do, or where we're housed. We're in a Division of Land and Water Stewardship, which is part of North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. We've got 10 staff members or so, and we're governed by an executive director and a 9-member board of trustees who actually make all of our funding decisions. And then we'll hit the next one there. So a little bit about background on how you apply for our funding. We are a granting agency, and we give grants for a number of things. And so there's some eligibility requirements and specific program areas. Any state agency, local government, municipality, or nonprofit organization can apply. The only catch is the nonprofit organization needs to have a mission that's part of its actual sanctified mission that overlaps with one of our resource values or our protection areas. So conservation, restoration, preservation, natural, cultural resources. It's pretty broad, but you've got to have some sort of overlap in that area. In general, I work as a field rep, and I'll do a better job introduce myself in a moment, helping connect organizations that may not have experience or complete overlap with our mission with applicants who do have experience and overlap, and helping put partnerships together. I should have said at the beginning, I'm the Western field rep, so I cover from the middle part of the state west, cover the Thread Trail area, and I work with applicants, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about the details of how I'm involved. But really, if you're thinking about an application with us, if any of this information is at all new to you, or you're looking at our grant cycle thinking, maybe I'll apply, or hey, I've got a project, you should call me. We should do a meeting and talk, because I'll help you get a higher score and more likely to get funded. That's the best thing I can offer. The fund has a couple, 4 big program areas: land acquisition, and I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of what we do land acquisition for. That's what I'm going to focus on today. Stream and water body restoration, innovative stormwater, really it's a research grant, and planning for some of the things above. So we do planning grants for any of those areas. The funding per year, we don't know what a normal year is anymore. A few years ago, I would have said it's about $25, $28 million that we could distribute over the course of a year. Last year, it was less than that. It was around $11 million of base funding plus some monthly license plate revenue, which turned into 17, 18, 19 million. We don't know what 2021 is going to look like budget-wise, but I have a pretty good feeling it's not going to be normal. So stay tuned on state budgets, and you know, we usually send out emails. You can sign up for our email list and find out what our budget is when we know what it is. All right, I'll move on to the next one. So when we get our applications in on every year, we rank them using a rating system. And the Board of Trustees generally make a decision on funding in the order of that ranking and score, but they don't have to. They can choose to move projects around or look at exceptional issues. But we do have a rating system, and I encourage you all to check that out if you're thinking about applying, get a sense of how you can score. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. Grant amounts, there's no stated minimum or maximum, but the trustees have tended to cap our acquisition projects at about $1.2 million. And grants range anywhere from $20,000 for a planning grant up to $1.2 million when it's capped on a given year for a land acquisition project. But they have done caps in recent years. The other common question is matching funds. There's not a minimum on how much you need to bring as match, but it is 20% of the ranking system score, 20 points out of 100. And so I really encourage folks to start off 50-50 if you can with match, or 40-60 or 60-40, depending on how you're looking at it. And I can help you hone in on how much match you really need to be competitive on an application with us. They really like to see leveraged funds in that match, kind of skin in the game from our applicants. And private donation of match is the most valuable. And that could include donation of land value from a landowner. That counts as private cash match to our applications. And it's very competitive, so it's worth thinking about and worth talking to me about how to put a competitive grant together. All righty. So the program for land acquisition, there's the rating system preview up in the corner. The resource significance is our biggest chunk of scoring, and that's urban greenways, riparian buffers, natural heritage elements, military buffers, and cultural and historic sites. I think of each one of those as a resource bucket, and we score based on the bucket that has the most resource in it. So if your riparian buffers are really high scoring, that's what we'll use for most of that 58% potential score. Or if your natural heritage elements, your rare and endangered species are the most, that's what we'll use. That's the front half of the application. It's really the highest chunk that you really cannot control. You can't change what your stream is rated as or what rare and endangered species, but you can control how ready you are for the project, your match value. Sometimes you can control public benefits like access and education to really bolster your application and be competitive. Projects all have to be protected with a permanent conservation agreement, and those conservation agreements have to protect the stuff that we're giving you a score on, so the buffers and natural resources. Usually it's a 300-foot buffer around streams, but a lot of organizations just protect the entire property if it's going to be a preserve, although not required. And we don't fund the value of or removal, creation of any kind of infrastructure. So if there's houses or other stuff there, we really don't want to have infrastructure on our land acquisition projects, and we certainly don't want it on the budget. It's a reimbursement model of payment, and you've got to spend our money in parallel with how much match you've spent. So if you've committed $100,000 of match and you've only spent $50,000, you can only get half of what we've said we'll give to you for our funds. So match is something you've got to keep an eye on, and it's something that can get complicated if you've got too many different sources of match. Like if you're relying on 100 different volunteers to show up and sign a form to get your match in the door, it can become a challenge. And I talked about the caps a little bit. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So I think this is my last slide before handing it over to Marissa. Go to our website, nclwf.nc.gov/apply. You can check out our funding manuals, which are really authoritative, awesome documents that we work really hard to describe our work, show you what the application is going to look like, give you the rating system, answer FAQs, talk about restrictions that we require on properties and all that good stuff. And folks who read and use those funding manuals will have a much easier time working with Marissa on all the pieces that she's going to talk about once you're funded. Again, my contact will be at the end of this. I really encourage you all to reach out to me for consulting on potential applications. That's really time well spent. And the applications and all the pieces will be ready for consumption and use on December 7th. And the 2021 grant cycle applications are due February 1st. The decisions for 2021 are made usually in September at a September board meeting. And after that date, you can spend money that we've awarded. So just as a general timeline, a closing on a property for a 2021 application in February, you're going to know you get the grant in September, and then it's 2022, maybe the second quarter of 2022, before you can actually plan on a closing. So it's a little bit of a long timeline, but it's a big amount of money. There's a lot of T's to cross and I's to dot that we help you get started, and Marissa and our program managers work with, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about the process after that award happens.
Great, thanks so much, Damon. Hi again, everyone. My name is Marissa Hartzler, and my role with the North Carolina Land and Water Fund is really, like Damon mentioned, in the post-award and then really in the long-term stewardship of projects. So I'm going to pick it up from there. As Damon mentioned, funding decisions are made by our trustees in the fall, and of course, after much celebration, that's when you get your grant award contract. Soon thereafter. And of course, there's quite a few more steps that exist between funded and protected, and even then steps that will stick around even longer, and that's forever. So I'm going to touch briefly on these pieces of the project. But first, there's been a lot of process and flow charts, and all of this can be really intimidating. Especially before lunch. So I want to just pause here and say that, at the end of all of this work of, applying and sweating out a decision and closing your project, at the end, you're going to get to celebrate again. And it's going to be with a property that's protected, for its natural or cultural or historic or all values. And it'll be protected forever. And you'll be able to make this property available to the public for recreation. So that's your goal. that's our goal as well. And, our entire team looks forward to working with applicants to make these a reality. So after that little moment of Zen, straight into the legal documents. Once you begin working on your closing, you'll be responsible for preparing a lot of different documentation. And that ranges from the deed that will convey the property to your organization, a detailed survey of the property that shows us everything going on the land, a title commitment that shows us, what else has been promised and to whom on the property, and a lot of documents like that. You can see them on the screen here on the left. And the document that I in stewardship interact the most with is the conservation agreement that Damon previously mentioned. And for some folks, especially with greenways, that conservation easement agreement is a declaration of restrictive covenants. And for folks who have properties that maybe have a little bit more natural heritage value or more conservation values, the decision may be to go with a more robust conservation easement. But regardless of the instrument that's used, that's going to be the document that protects the property perpetually. And so again, this is something that the awardee organization prepares, all of these documents, and then submits them to the North Carolina Land and Water staff for review. We have a team that reviews in-house, and then it's an iterative process. So we work with you all to get the documents into tip-top format, and then we forward along for legal review with our department. And then at the end of that process, you'll get the approval to close, the really exciting moment. That's the mechanism that releases the funds so that you can actually, set a closing and go ahead and buy the property. So I know that, preparing for closing when we just talked about applications may seem like putting the cart before the horse, but I think if you're an interested applicant, thinking about this process and just knowing the different documents that you're going to be expected to prepare can help make the process go so much more smoothly. And it seems a little obvious, but one of the biggest tips we can give you for making sure that your closing process goes smoothly, and something you can think about now, is making sure not to buy the property before you receive an award, and making sure not to buy the property until after the Land and Water Fund has reviewed documents and approved closing. We understand that there's sometimes, urgent situations that require an out of order approach, but definitely the least stressful item is to actually wait and make sure that you have all of these approvals in place. I know when I look at this list of documents, it's kind of intimidating. And if it's intimidating for you too, that is totally okay. We do not expect that every applicant who is awarded a grant is going to be an expert in all things real estate transactions. And so another big tip that you can be thinking about now is working with a good closing attorney who has worked on land transactions, and even better, maybe they've worked on conservation easement projects before. That is going to be really helpful in organizing documents, making sure that all of those T's are crossed, and also making sure that you, as the eventual landowner, understands the property that you're purchasing. And finally, you might consider working with your local land trust or a conservation nonprofit, because they live and breathe this work every day, and so they can be a fantastic resource so that you don't have to go this alone. And that's not really true. We're a team here that's ready to help you. So we can't prepare closing documents for you, but we are here to provide whatever resources and support we can. Okay, so thinking further down the process, once you actually have the approval to close, it's tempting to think that everything is completed at that point. But I like to think about the stewardship program as a long-term relationship between your organization and the state. And again, it's one where we are all on the same team and we're working toward the same goals. And this long-term relationship is based on the fact that there is that conservation agreement that will be in place. It'll be recorded as soon as you purchase the property. And again, this is that declaration of restrictive covenants or a conservation easement. And again, no matter which document, it's going to outline all the things you can and cannot do on the property. There's an abbreviated list on the slide right now, examples of allowable things on top and prohibited uses on the bottom, but I won't read that list. I'll let you go ahead and check that out. But I'm hoping as you sort of glance over it, nothing too surprising pops out. You know, in the end, we want you to be able to care for the land. We want you to be able to manage it for ecological and public recreation purposes, and, you know, all while preventing anything that would harm those purposes. So again, you know, what can you consider now as a potential applicant when you're thinking about a long-term conservation agreement? And definitely one thing to do is consider the restrictions early. We have all of our conservation agreement templates on our website. We'll give you the link to that on the slide in a second, but you can go in there and search for conservation agreements and you'll see our different templates. And, you know, there's a lot of pages of legal wording there. So, you know, feel free to take a deep dive, or if you want to, you know, see more of a summary, the funding manual that Damon referenced earlier will give you a really great snapshot and sort of break allowable activities into standard, absolutely, we expect you may want to do this, to, well, you know, maybe, but limited and with a little bit more approvals, and then all the way to, no, we're sorry, that's not compatible with our program. I think it's really important to consider all of the uses early, which I know is difficult because, you know, you're thinking about a property that you don't even own yet and how you might use it 50 years from now. But definitely, you know, think through it and think about any special reserved rights, things that don't necessarily fit into our neat little buckets, and definitely talk it over with your field rep. Dreaming big does not disqualify you. It does not lose you points, but, you know, it may just mean that the program manager needs to say no to something. It's better to know that upfront rather than to have hopes dashed later on. And I will just add one more thing, you know, on this slide under prohibited uses, I actually have an asterisk next to commercial. And I think that's because, you know, on the application for this year, you're going to see questions asking you about any potential commercial uses that you might have on the property. This is changing slightly. So that's very new, something that's evolving just this week. So there will be an opportunity to talk about potential commercial uses on a property, you know, thinking small scale events and fundraisers, certainly not like bed and breakfast. All right. So you may be wondering now, you know, in addition to following the rules that are established by the conservation agreement, you know, what other responsibilities your organization as the landowner has at this point. And there are a couple. The fund does need annual monitoring of all of our conservation easements. And so that will be established, and reports will come to the fund to, you know, basically do like an annual checkup for the property. And we will do check-ins as needed with properties with other types of conservation agreements as well. We might reach out to you as the landowner to just submit a quick web form and let us know what rights you've gone ahead and exercised and what your plans are, and, you know, just how things are generally going. Let's us, you know, have a contact and get updated. I think the other big thing is that there are some things, some reserved rights in your conservation agreement that would need approvals, that you need to contact the fund first. And this includes trail building, whether it's natural surface trails or greenways or paved trails for universal access, as well as, you know, construction for any special reserved rights, maybe the board approved a parking lot on your property. And so before you would go ahead and construct that, you may need approval from the fund. So that is something that I help facilitate for our organization. And it's a pretty simple. I'm not sure when. Can you all hear me again? It's telling me I'm muted. Okay, thank you. All right. So I'm not sure where I got cut off there, but the plans are something that I help manage, I help facilitate, submit them over email. It's a pretty straightforward process. I think especially for this group, it's important to note that, our trail policy that we've had now in place for, I think, about 2 years. It's a great policy. It really grew out of the fact that so many of our partner organizations, are working in best management practices, and we really took a nod from that. And so, our policy recognizes that sustainable trails that are, ready for the public to love, are, first designed with those best practices in mind, and then, monitored and maintained. So, again, just another example of us all having the same goals here. So again, if you're thinking about this from the applicant standpoint, again, thinking about forever is really difficult, but again, knowing your plans and also, what your stakeholders might want. And as I'm sure a lot of you already do, being prepared to manage those stakeholder expectations, right? So if your community wants a dog park, disc golf, and a swimming pool, that's probably not something that will be compatible with a land and water grant. Not probably, won't be. But it's good input to hear, and it might just be targeted for another property. But if they're interested in trails and opportunities to get out to hike and bike, that's perfect. Again, always reviewing plans with us early in the process is fantastic. So if any of you on the call already have a conservation agreement that's under on property that's under your management, definitely would love to touch base. I'm the person who helps coordinate those approvals, and I have great assistance from our fellow colleagues, but also subject matter experts like the Natural Heritage Program and state parks and others. And so, we're happy to connect you with other resources that can help you make your plans a reality. And definitely always available to answer questions about your conservation agreement, help you interpret what the documents mean. And of course, always really excited to hear about the great things that you have going on these properties. So I just wanted to leave you with some parting inspiration from our section of this presentation. In the 11 county North Carolina portion of the Carolina Thread Trail region, there have been over 156 land and water fund projects that have resulted in over 7,000 acres protected in your area. So that's all of the blue dots on this map. And I shouldn't say blue dots because each one of those is really, it's a success story. I know conservation, especially when you have a government funder, like Damon said, it can be a long process, it can be complicated, but the results can be absolutely fantastic. So I know Amanda's going to talk more specifically about Catawba Land Conservancy's experience, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of projects. The Conservancy assisted the U.S. National Whitewater Center for a property with mountain bike trails, which was really great. I think that was one of the first mountain bike trail plans we reviewed after our new policy. And that was just a really wonderful partnership. Of course, huge congratulations to Catawba County on breaking ground for the Mountain Creek Park, which was also an older than Clean Water Management Trust Fund project. Had the pleasure of helping to review the trail plan and actually getting to go out on the property and meet with the trail designer and meet with all the partners who were involved. I think it's a fantastic example of how planning can really make a world of difference in getting a fantastic new facility. So excited to see where that is going. And finally, definitely congratulations to the Conservation Fund on a 2020 award, much more recently, for a park that will be eventually conveyed to Gaston County. So I think all of these really highlight the power and the strength and partnership. And these are just 3 of the dots that you see on the map. So really far too many successful projects to name. So I'll leave you with that inspiration, and I hope you know that we look forward to working with you all as well. So if you want to get started, definitely reach out to your field rep. As Damon said, he's your Western field rep. If anybody is from the eastern portion of the state, Justin Mercer is your representative. Contact information here and also on our website. They're here to help you. They're fantastic, and I know that they are super excited to hear all of your great plans for this year and beyond. And of course, if you already have a conservation agreement that was funded through a Clean Water or now Land and Water Fund project, I would love to connect with you. That is a lot of dots on the map. I have not made it to all of them. I think I could probably make a few careers out of trying to visit all of them, but I would love to connect, hear what's going on with the property, and really put some stories and some names to those dots. So. All right, well, thanks everyone. And we'll definitely be here at the end for questions. But at this time, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Amanda for Catawba Lands Conservancy's perspective
here. All right, well, thanks so much, Marissa and Damon. And as Alicia mentioned earlier, I'm Amanda Byram. I'm the Land Conservation Director here at Catawba Lands Conservancy. And in my portion of the presentation, I'll be providing some examples of how Catawba Lands Conservancy has worked with NC Land and Water Fund grant projects to acquire property that furthered one of our central missions of connecting lives to nature through trail projects. So some background on Catawba Lands Conservancy. We are a nonprofit land trust going into our 30th year next year, and we work in a 6-county footprint around the Catawba River and around the greater Charlotte area. 6 counties, including Catawba, Gaston, Iredell, Lincoln, Mecklenburg, and Union, as shown here on this map, where we've successfully protected over 17,000 acres. And our conservation priorities include wildlife habitat and water quality preservation, farmland protection, and providing access to outdoor opportunities, including the Carolina Thread Trail. And so the way we carry out that work is through acquisition of land and conservation easement projects and stewardship in perpetuity of those properties. And we target properties for acquisition or conservation easements for acquisition through strategic planning that looks at mapping overlays of habitat, critical watersheds, farms that are potentially under threat for loss of operation or seeing a lot of development in an area, as well as priority trail corridors for our municipal partners with greenways or the Carolina Thread Trail. And we act as the lead agency for the Carolina Thread Trail, not only acquiring those properties where we can put in trails on our CLC owned preserves, but also acquiring trail easements and assisting with that process. And one of our most significant funding sources, as Marissa and Damon have just given us an overview of that program, is the NC Land and Water Fund. And those projects have facilitated a lot of our trail expansion. So for example, the Seven Oaks Preserve is one of our preserves in the South Fork Corridor in Gaston County. And that was a bargain sale purchase funded by NC Land and Water Fund grants that allowed CLC to acquire about 78 acres and then work with NC Land and Water Fund to protect that buffer along Lake Wylie with restrictive covenants. And that project has facilitated not only water quality protection, but trail construction on the preserve, nearby trail easement, and allowed a parking lot lease on an adjoining property that provided a trailhead with additional access. So some of the significant impacts related to this project are the development of the Seven Oaks Preserve Trail, which is about 2.6 miles of natural surface trail on the preserve itself, again, as part of that priority corridor at the South Fork, which is comprised of about 19 miles in total. And this trail additionally provides connections to one of our neighbors there to the preserve, the Daniel Stowe Botanical Garden, which creates potential for visitors to access and utilize a 5-mile loop. And the Seven Oaks Preserve Trail is one of our most popular and most regularly used CTT trails. So then moving just further to the north in the South Fork corridor is the Goat Island Preserve in Gaston County. It's located in the town of Cramerton and is adjacent to Goat Island Park. This was another bargain sale purchase that was facilitated by NC Land and Water Fund grants, and that allowed CLC to make a purchase of an additional 38 acres. And in this circumstance, there was a little bit of a slowdown in negotiations. Kind of as Marissa mentioned, sometimes you might have to work with NC Land and Water Fund on timing for some of these projects. So this was an acquisition that had to be completed within a particular time frame based on an option agreement with the landowner. And in order to expedite that, CLC had to complete that closing using our internal revolving fund, and then work on that NC Land and Water Fund grant to reimburse those costs. And this location is similarly encumbered with NC Land and Water Fund conservation easement. And CLC subsequently was given an additional 3 acres by donation, and then later gave a trail easement to the town in order to enhance greenway connections. So here you'll see a couple of examples of the town greenways that are part of the Carolina Thread Trail and are located on the property and adjacent to the property. So the Goat Island Greenway is about 0.7 miles, and the additional expansion of that, the Riverlink Greenway, is another 0.7 miles. And in this case, the Riverlink Greenway, located on the preserve property, is actually a paved greenway trail. It's ADA accessible and connects to some local residential neighborhoods. So it provides that connection between residential areas and the community there, over to the town center, to what's a very popular Blueway with the boat launches there, and has been really part of the town's revitalization and economic growth that they really capitalized on with promoting outdoor recreation. So a final project in the South Fork corridor located in Gaston County is the Far Yarns Preserve project. And in this case, it used a little bit different transaction structure that CLC was able to put together. And we received the very generous donation from a landowner of approximately 94 acres. Again, you'll notice a theme that are many changes in transaction structures and restructuring of projects to kind of make things work. Unfortunately, have worked with great NC Land and Water Fund representatives who've been flexible in the way we've worked on these projects and allowed revisions of grants. And in this case, the project changed a bit from a combination of a purchase and partial donation to a full donation, which was, again, very generous, but the landowner did not find it feasible to make that donation and then also make a stewardship contribution and cover the costs of any of the closing costs or due diligence costs that might be attributable to them. So in this case, NC Land and Water Fund subgrants or mini grants, a program that applies to costs associated with property donated to an organization, could be utilized in order to carry this to fruition. And the trail impacts of this particular project include development of the South Fork Trail, which is about a 2-mile long natural surface trail along the South Fork Catawba River. This is another very popular blueway that this provides access to, and also provides connection to a residential development in the area. So shifting a bit to Mecklenburg County, 2 projects that I'd like to highlight here, tagging, as Marissa mentioned, to the U.S. National Whitewater Center. And these 2 projects, the Long Creek project and the Holley Track project, were each awarded in earlier years and took several years and went through many iterations to complete. The conservation strategy with the Long Creek property involved bargain sale purchases of fee and the conservation easements. And in total, CLC was able to protect about 118 acres through those purchases, funded by NC Land and Water Fund in the 2008 grant cycle. Those land transactions finally closed in 2011 and also included deed restrictions on an additional 68 acres. Close by the Holley Track was a bargain sale purchase of a conservation easement. And this was another case where there were many changes to the transaction structure over time and through the flexibility of NC Land and Water Fund parameters and working with their staff, CLC was able to revise the grant in order to purchase about 192 acres in a conservation easement, which included, as part of that project, a subsequent trail easement. And that project closed in 2018. And so you'll see here a map of the trail system at the U.S. National Whitewater Center. So the Long Creek properties, actually adjacent to the Whitewater Center property that I'm sure we're all familiar with, one of the most popular outdoor recreation destinations really in the region. So those properties have allowed the addition of 2.1 miles of natural surface trails to some of the existing U.S. National Whitewater Center trails on that main property area. So it's a little harder to see on this map, but across Belmead from the majority of where the trails are located on U.S. National Whitewater Center property is the conservation easement acquired through the Holley Track project. And that property includes existing trails as well as additional trails that are now in development. So in addition to those projects that highlight properties where the trail development has been completed or has been constructed and is underway, I'd also like to talk about a couple of projects that have sort of facilitated areas to identify future trail expansion or future trail construction where there's not been completed trail or greenway at this time. So one of those was the Rocky Pot Preserve. That was a project that was part of the 2014 grant funding cycle. And in this case, it's located in Cabarrus County. This property was part of a larger, approximately 70-acre parcel that was subject to development. And CLC was able to negotiate with the developer who owned the property to acquire at a bargain sale 39 acres, primarily floodplain along the Rocky River. And the developer retained the remaining portion in order to build that out. So in this case, NC Land and Water funds were utilized to complete that acquisition. And the property is the site of a future trail segment planned with the city of Concord. So this trail will be an important piece on the Rocky River corridor that connects the cities of Concord and Kannapolis. So another two more recent projects that though I'm new to the Conservancy, did get to work on kind of in their final stages are the St. James Preserve and the Old Stumpy Preserve. Those were awarded in 2018 and 2019 respectively, both located in the Forney Creek corridor in Lincoln County, and they both closed just a few months ago. So those are recent acquisitions. Trail has not been developed yet, but we are very excited about those projects. They were both bargain sale purchases totaling approximately 160 acres between the two preserves, and all are subject to NC Land and Water Fund conservation easements, with the exception of about 2.5 acres on the Old Stumpy Preserve property that's been carved out for a trailhead and parking facility, as Marissa mentioned in her presentation. Getting that approval and being able to plan out those facilities was part of the process in this case as well. And that trailhead facility will be close to Business Highway 16, so really bring a lot of visibility and accessibility to the trails on this property. And the trail miles on the properties themselves will be about 3.5 miles, and it'll facilitate completion of this particular segment. So in addition to projects that have been acquired, we would also like to highlight, or I'd like to highlight a project that's upcoming. And again, you saw this on Marissa's slides, a mention of this, but CLC has been working with the Conservation Fund as a financing partner on a large acquisition, a bargain sale purchase of about 557 acres that sits on the mouth of Catawba Creek, right on Lake Wylie. And the Conservation Fund was actually the applicant for the NC Land and Water Fund grant that CLC assisted on. So they'll be acting as the agency who makes this purchase of the property here in Gaston County. But the trail impacts, of course, the water quality impacts are a huge driver of this project. It's very important, critical for drinking water as one of the last undeveloped pieces of this size on Lake Wylie. Also provides wildlife habitat preservation, but in addition provides outdoor recreation opportunities in what's a very rapidly developing area. And we expect this project, once it's acquired and facilities are completed there at this location, that it will provide about 2.5 miles of future trail. And as you can see on the larger overview map here, it's really a key acquisition to fulfill the long-term vision for this full corridor. So as you can see, NC Land and Water Fund, just from highlighting these few projects among many projects that we've worked on with NC Land and Water Fund over the years, it's been a very meaningful funding source for CLC's success, as well as the success of our trail expansion and trail programs. And I think at this time, I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but I think we'll transition over to Alicia for questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, I would just like to encourage everyone to go ahead and post their questions. Right now, I don't see any in the Q&A box. So if you do have one, please go ahead and post that in Q&A, or you're welcome to chat as well. You can ask questions for Marissa, Damon, or Amanda. We have about 15, not quite 15 more minutes until this session will close at 11:45.
And say one more thing about our application process, if people are thinking about questions or don't have any, if that's okay. Just
yeah, go ahead, Damon, go ahead, and then there is one question, so I'll get to that.
This is just brief, but for those of you who are experienced with our application process in the last 4 or 5 years, we've been using a grant sign-in, state-run IT solution called the Grants Management System, GMS, which has been a little bit challenging for some folks to access and to navigate, and kind of requires multiple attachments in different places, and was not always super intuitive for me, much less new applicants and folks around the state. So this year we're converting to a new application system that's a system we've used in the past, but we're using it a lot to its fullest, called FormSite. And it's just a really good web-based application form that you can start your information, you get a password and a username set up for each of our programs. You can work on your application, save it, submit it, and re-edit it as many times as you want up until our deadline. It'll email you a copy of our application. It'll gently scold you if you forget to fill out a field. And if you put that on one screen and our funding manual on the other, and you are 90% on your way to success. And then call me a couple times with questions if you have them. But I just wanted to point that out for folks that it's been a couple years and you're kind of remembering an arduous process for the actual application technology. I'm really excited that that's not the case this year and hopefully into the future. And if you do have questions or issues on that, you can contact the field reps anytime. We flashed up a map showing Justin's range actually coming a little bit into the CTT counties. We change our east and west distribution of who handles what applications based on how many there are. So usually I'm actually taking a few more counties going east. So covering the range for this conference and a few more counties. Sometimes I'll end up in Salisbury and around that area. So we'll assign a field rep, but you're welcome to reach out to me. And if that changes once the applications come in, that's no big deal. And I'll get back to that question, but I just wanted to give you all a preview of this year's application pieces.
Thanks, Damon. We actually have 2 questions. I think these will be best probably for both you or Marissa. The first one is, can you clarify if paved greenways are eligible for this type of funding?
So the land that is hosting the paved greenway certainly is. We don't really get involved with prescribing the surface of your greenway. We do define greenways fairly specifically as what you all might imagine a slightly more urban greenway than a trail in the woods. It does need to be riparian in nature. It does need to have an adopted plan by an entity saying we have a plan for this greenway. We generally want it to be connecting or working on connecting or a future connection piece between, 2 places people would go on a greenway. And a greenway generally looks like a path where 2 joggers can pass, and whether or not it's paved and ready for the strollers or just, a nice, chipped gravel path. That's up to you all. In our scoring rating criteria, rating system, we do have a piece for how many water quality BMPs are incorporated and how far the greenway is from the stream. So the further you're away from the stream, 30 versus 50 feet versus 15, or the more water quality BMPs you might be including, you can squeeze some more points out of our system, but we do not prescribe the actual surface. But we do not match or pay for the greenway infrastructure. So the cost of that pavement shouldn't be on our budget anywhere. And it's a little bit of an anomaly as far as it's a greenway program, but it's really land acquisition for greenways. Go back to my clause earlier about not covering the cost of infrastructure. That pavement, gravel, parking lot, that's all infrastructure that we don't pay for or put on our budget as match.
Thank you, Damon. The other question we have is, any guess on whether the legislature will provide additional funds in the near future?
Nope, no guesses. Lots of people, want to do that, and we hear from various decision makers that that's their goal and that they love the projects that are happening locally in their regions. But with COVID era budgets, not knowing what the impact is on the tax revenue, we do see fairly consistent purchasing of custom license plates that benefit us, but that's only, maybe 2/5 of our funds or something. The rest is legislative appropriations, both recurring on a base level that can change and recurring additional funds that do change a given year. There's just no prediction of additional funds yet. And the land trust community generally hears about that stuff before I do, to be honest. Marissa, you might have other thoughts. But.
Well, I was just going to say, Damon, I hope that folks don't take potentially nebulous budget issues as a reason not to apply, because I think it's really important if you have a project that you would like to see funded, applying is a great way of showing need. If we, have 100 projects that can't be funded and they were great projects, I think that's really important to demonstrate the need and the desire for applicants to get involved in this sort of thing. So I hope it's not that bit of nebulous information doesn't dissuade you from applying.
And I can give you a couple other good reasons to apply. That's a really good point, Marissa. I can help folks estimate how they might score. And sometimes I say, what I'm looking at right now, before we know all the details, is not a super high score, but it could be. So I don't discourage people in that situation to not apply. Or if I say we might be short on funds next year, I don't discourage people from applying. It's just a matter of what your expectations are and what your multiple pathways of conservation strategy are. By applying, you get the Natural Heritage Program to show up and likely to show up and do natural heritage surveys if they think there's a chance of boosting your score. You don't usually know that stuff unless there happens to be a specific survey on your site before the application. By applying, you get us to give you a score and you know exactly where you stand after the end of that cycle. And by applying, often it can leverage other
Apologies, everyone. I think perhaps we might have had a technical issue there with Damon freezing up.
I apologize. I wish I was prepared enough to give you the rest of his thoughts, but my clairvoyance isn't great today. I'm sorry.
Yeah, apologies about that. If he comes back on here, we'll have him continue. I will say we have just a few more minutes, so if there's any final questions, please go ahead and post those in the Q&A or the chat. I'm going to give it another minute just to see if anyone's typing. And then if not, we'll see if there's any final parting words from our presenters. Thanks, everyone. I think Damon might be back in. Let's see if everyone will hold tight a minute here. Damon, I think you just, yep, Tara, if you could turn on your mic and your video if you are in the session, please. Thanks, everyone, for your patience while we're seeing if we could get Damon back in.
Alicia, I'm seeing Damon back in.
Hey, sorry about that.
Oh, great. We lost you just for a minute, but please go ahead if you remember where you left off.
If Marissa picked up for me or not, but sorry about that. Everything just disappeared and Zoom was being fussy for a minute. I was just saying that a lot of times when you apply the first year, you promote private interest, the private landowners and other funders get invested in the process. And if you don't get funding the first year because of low funding or not quite high enough score, almost universally, if you apply again the next year, which is not that hard because you've done the application the first time, you can redo it without a lot of trouble, your score will go up. You've either worked on your match, you've worked out deals on public access you didn't have, you've done the investigations on the natural heritage, you've gotten the landowner to agree to a little bit more donation because they really want to make it happen and they saw it almost miss the first year. There's a whole bunch of reasons why applying and maybe just having an expectation that it could take 2 application cycles to get it done, if that works for you and your landowner, can be a reasonable thing. So sorry about the cutout there, but that's the end of that piece.
Thanks, Damon. I am not seeing any other questions, so I think that concludes our session. Unless presenters, I just want to say thank you, Marissa, Damon, and Amanda, for joining us today. And if you have any final parting words, otherwise we will conclude.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right.